So today we have a guest that really needs no introduction. He has a very prolific career as a cinematographer, and we are delighted and honored to have with us today Dean Cundey. So first, I want to thank you for agreeing to be on the show today.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm always delighted to help folks understand, what I do, but what they can do if they're aspiring to film. So, it's a great pleasure to be talking to you.
It's a pleasure talking to you too. As I said, I know you don't have a whole lot of time today, so we're just going to get into it. What were your influences in becoming a cinematographer? Was it a certain director, a movie you saw when you were younger?
Yeah, I've wanted to be in film since I was young. I think my interest was peaked when I was about 10 years old. 12 years old, I sort of decided that I wanted to be in film, if you can do that when you're 12. A lot of kids decide they want to be an astronaut or a cowboy or something. I wanted to be in film. And I remember one film that particularly struck me was Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. When it came out, I was very impressed and as a kid, by the world that had been created, the fact that they could create this submarine and the adventure and everything, and get us to believe it. And I think that's what it was. It was the sense of magic, the illusion of film and how you could get people to believe something. So as a result, I, had convinced myself at that early age that I wanted to go into film and be part of the magic.
Yeah, Simon and I, my twin brother, we have, ever since we can remember, we've always loved filmmaking and the process, and we dived a little bit into the business ourselves, and that's exactly what you said. It's about the magic of making someone believe this is actually happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. So we all know you had done many films with John Carpenter, I believe starting with Halloween. And I've heard in past interviews you've done where, now, I wasn't sure, did you actually invent the Steadicam or the Panaglide, or you were just one of the first ones who used it for film?
No, I wish I had invented it. No, I think we were one of the first to use it as a storytelling device. It had been used as a moving camera in a few movies for a shot or two. Ground for Glory, we follow a guy through this crowd of vessel people. For Rocky, he runs up the stairs and celebrates. But they were always just sort of embellishment shots. John said that he was completely intrigued by it as a storytelling device. How would you use the camera in a different way to tell the story? So I went to Panavision, who had built their Panaglide version of it, and just started practicing. They were kind enough to let us wear one and practice around their factory in their parking lot. And it was something that I immediately took to the fact that here was a way you could move the audience in a way that was not the kind of thing they had seen before. Yeah, they used handheld cameras quite a bit, but handheld cameras are always kind of jerky. And that's not the way we as people see the world. When we walk around, the world of the view is not jerky. Our eyes and our brain and everything make it very smooth. And the idea of the Steadicam was to make it smooth, just like you were witnessing it yourself. And as a result, you could take the audience on this journey through, whatever the story was, in a way that was sort of recognizable to them as smooth and mobile. And so it immediately became such a great tool that as we were shooting, John would say, "Well, let's do this one now with the Steadicam," and we expanded the use of it, I think.
Okay. Yeah, because it really it had a whole different feel to it. You as a viewer, you felt like you were in those scenes with the characters. And I think it became more real to the audience, which in turn became more scarier to the audience as well.
Yeah,
So,
I think so. You weren't aware of the camera because with handheld, when it's jerky, the sides of the frame are always rugged and with the Steadicam, that sort of distraction disappeared and you were part of the story and part of the scene.
exactly. Now, you've talked a lot before about how crucial lighting was on Halloween, but I've never really heard you talk a lot about one of my favorites, the fog, with not only working with lighting, but working with, I'm not sure if you use fog machines, lighting shadows, balancing out between the lighting and the fog. To me, it kind of sounds like it might have been a nightmare at first to try to get everything coordinated together. Um, uh,
Yeah, I have to say that I don't think I've never approached a film as, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. It, in fact, is going to be an adventure, a journey. So it's always a case of saying, what does the story need? What does the director want to do as far as using the camera? How much can I embellish the director's ideas with how to use the camera? Um, and so when we got to the fog, we just said, oh, well, we have to do a movie about the fog. How are we going to do it? And there are fog machines that have been around for decades. So we said, well, we'll use that, but how do we make it even more so and scary? And how can people come out of the fog and disappear into it? So it became a storytelling device. So we really sort of embraced the opportunity to use it as part of the story.
Now, did they use only fog machines, or was there dry ice as well? Do you remember?
Um, it all depends on what you want the fog to do. If you squirt it out of just a regular machine, it dissipates. They actually have on the front nozzle where the fog comes out a basket where you put dry ice. And in doing that, it cools the fog, makes it stay close to the ground. Excuse me. So we used a combination, and sometimes we'd use two machines, one to keep it on the ground and one to let it rise. And it was all about teaching the fog how to act. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
How to interpret its character.
yeah. Which you guys very well succeeded with that. And I know that of course you went on to do The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, which were both very special effects heavy driven films. I was curious, what were the different challenges between both films, being so vastly different from each other, but yet having so many special effects to work with?
Well, I was always interested in special effects. When I came out of film school, I took any job I could get, some of which were special effects jobs. Making well, I would help the explosives expert. As a cinematographer, I would help him and learn from him about how do you blow things up. I'll tell and you know, mechanical effects and all that stuff. So I had a good grounding in technique, and I could always ask the effects guy for particular things or techniques or whatever. So I think each each film I did, I just sort of embraced the idea of how do you tell the story with this stuff, mechanical effects and fog machines and wires and any whatever it was. So each subsequent film was really just about what does the story need and what are the techniques we can use to accomplish it.
And you know, especially with The Thing, you know, there's so many practical effects. How do they position the special effects, the practical effects, in a way that you have, in a way that you need to shoot it, or how does that work?
Yeah, you know, Rob Bottin did some amazing creature effects, sculptures, mechanical effects, and everything. And you know, I think in cases like that, you treat the creature or the effect um, as a character. Where should it be in the scene, in the film, in the frame? How do you compose so that the background is correct? Um, and then after you've positioned it, you now say, well, how can I light it for the most dramatic effect? And a lot of times you have to foresee what's going to happen in a scene. You have to foresee the shot so that you can say, well, we need some darkness, so let's make sure that all of the scene we shoot before the creature, there's that dark corner over there, or the lighting is very sketchy, or whatever you're going to need eventually, so that the creature shots don't just stick out as being separate. They are, in fact, um, part of the film, and you know, it's like that for everything. I mean, if you're just working with actors, you always think about where should they be positioned in the set or in the scene for the most effect. Well, you treat the creature just like another one of those actors.
Yeah, now, I've always heard from some cinematographers I've talked to that one of the most trickiest, challenging scenes to shoot is shooting a group of people at a table. Um, and have you found that to be true with the camera positioning and lighting?
We have what we call the classic um, um, camera direction or scene direction. Which way is a character looking in the frame to tell the audience where he's looking? If he looks from the right to the left, you assume that the person he's talking to is to the left side of the audience. So when you turn around, you have to maintain that direction so the audience doesn't get lost. Who's talking to whom? Well, dinner tables are especially that way because you always have to let the audience know that whoever just spoke is being looked at by the next person in the next cut. And if they look from on the right to left for some people, if they look from left to right to the other people, you have to keep all of the screen direction in mind, and it becomes very, very complex with dinner tables. Once you kind of establish the table, you've got a little flexibility. The audience will know where people are and who they're talking to, but it takes a little while to let the audience feel comfortable with the space that they are in, presumably.
Yeah, so basically, you really have to treat it as if you're the audience. You have to put yourself in the audience's shoes. How are they going to look at the movie, at the film?
Always, you know, you you have to remember you're always making a film for an audience. you shouldn't be making the film for yourself. If you are, and a lot of new filmmakers, young people and students, they sometimes get caught up in the idea that, well, I'm telling a story that's meaningful to me, and I'm going to make this film for me. Well, um, if you make it only for yourself and the audience doesn't understand it or care about it, then you're not going to have an audience. So films like that, the extreme cases where nobody sees it, why did you even make the film? Why don't you just sit and think about that story in your head? Close your eyes and let the film run in your brain. If you really want an audience to see it, to be involved in the story and the characters, you now have to make a film for an audience. How can they see the story? How do they feel about the characters? Do they understand where they are at any point in the story? In other words, where they're standing, what they're looking at, how can they see the actor's face when he gets really mad, or does it happen off camera and you don't know it happened? There's a lot of simple, obvious things like that sometimes get overlooked. So you're always visualizing the movie in your mind. You always have to see it in your mind, and then transfer that onto film or digital media. So an audience sees exactly the same thing.
And so do storyboards help a lot with that?
They can. I storyboards can be a double-edged sword in that if they're just made by a storyboard artist, and that's occurred on some films I've worked on, they take the script and they hand it to the storyboard artist, or they hand it to, in one case, 10 different storyboards artists, and they each took 1/10 of the script and did their own storyboards. Well, in that case, you've got 10 people making their own movie. If there isn't a lot of input from the director, as far as what each shot should be or how the scene should go, then when you get to actually doing it, sometimes the director will look at these storyboards that were made in a vacuum and say, oh, no, that's not what we're going to do, and throw them away. Other times they can be really good, especially if the director does little thumbnail sketches, even if they're not good at drawing. They at least say, here, I visualize this as a very high, wide shot. We cut down to a close on the girl, and then we cut to the open black doorway behind her, and the director will go through. In that case, the storyboards can be very handy, helping you pre-visualize the film. And it also helps a lot of other people to see the film beforehand, to see what the director wants, to see what the cinematographer wants or is facing. And in that case, the storyboards can be very, very useful.
Okay. So now we talked about The Thing a little bit, The Fog, and then you went on to work with Zemeckis on Back to the Future trilogy. But then came, perhaps, when I think about it, it could have been a very challenging film to do with Robert Zemeckis, which is Roger Rabbit. We know the live action and animation has been done before, but I don't believe it's ever been done to that extent, up to that level before. Did you have to relearn a whole new process of how you work to shoot Roger Rabbit?
Well, no, not so much relearning. I was interested in animation since I was, a kid, 10, 12 years old. And I was fascinated not with just the stories, but how did they do it? How did they get those drawings to move? How did they get so much heart in the environments and stuff? So I read everything I could as a kid. I saw every Disney movie. I read every animation book that came out. I still have a sizable collection of my early books. So I learned all about animation itself right from the beginning. And I was very, very familiar with it, so that when Bob Zemeckis came to me and said, well, how about this? How about a movie that is animation and live action compositing? And I said, yep, that's absolutely what we want to do. And I'd seen the efforts that Disney had done before and other people had done before, Pete's Dragon and Mary Poppins and so forth. And so we decided we were going to take it to the next level, to the next step past what had been done before. We were going to combine the animation and live action in new ways, with handling objects in the real world and the camera moving and going in and out of light and shadow, and a lot of techniques that we had been told you couldn't do. We said, well, those are the techniques we're going to use. And as a result, we were able to very carefully, as we went along, invent techniques and storytelling. And it's always been one of my favorite films I've worked on. When people ask, I say, well, there are 3 films that I look back on, you know, fondly as being a great step in my creative endeavors. Back to the Future trilogy, Jurassic Park, and Roger Rabbit. And Roger's one of the top ones.
Yeah, it was such an accomplishment, especially back then. I believe it came out in '88, and no one's ever seen a movie like that before. Like you said, we've seen Pete's Dragon, we've seen Mary Poppins, but we never saw a live action combined with animation where, like you said, the camera moves through the movie. It's shot like it is like a live action movie. Is that how you shot it? Just like a live action movie, or
Yeah, if Bob and I discussed how we wanted to do it to make it unique. And it was, you know, the guideline was always, if these characters really existed in our world, how would we shoot the movie? Where would we put the camera? Would we pan with them? Would we dolly? Would we, you know, exactly what would be the best way to tell the story if the characters were real? And then how do we accomplish that with them being animated and added in after the fact? So yeah, we very much said, how can we do this in a way that is different and unique, but for a good purpose? And get the audience to believe these characters are in that real world.
yeah. And one more question with that before we go to something else. In my mind, I'm thinking it must have been really tricky of how to coordinate the actors. Like Bob Hopkins, there's some scenes where he's holding Roger Rabbit by the ears. How did you coordinate filming that with what the animators would do in post?
Well, I have to say Bob Hoskins was brilliant in being able to visualize the rabbit, to always look in exactly the right space, to handle in pantomime, essentially, interacting with the rabbit, and to be able to pick him up by the ears and things like that. And then the animators would use each frame of the live action as reference. They made what they called photostats. They would enlarge each frame onto paper, the size of the animation cell and the animation paper.
Mm.
And that was the background the animator would look at while they were animating. So they would always be able to match Roger's ear position, or where he was in the frame for Bob Hoskins' look. And it was very much a team effort.
Okay. And of course, shooting a movie like Roger Rabbit, where nothing is visually there aside from the actors, that experience must have helped you when shooting Jurassic Park, shooting dinosaurs that aren't actually there with the actors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons Stephen wanted me to work on the film with him. And one of the things that made it a little easier, because I had done it, I didn't have to learn any of these techniques, so that I just was able to apply what I had learned on Roger Rabbit to Jurassic Park. And I think it, that's the kind of thing where if you're familiar with a technique, with a technology, it allows you to concentrate on the storytelling as opposed to saying, whoa, wait, we're going to do what here? And then have to understand the technology. It's just another tool in your
Your
toolbox.
arsenal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So now I've been curious, transitioning from film to digital. What are your thoughts on the advantages between shooting on 35 compared to shooting digitally?
Well, there's always this discussion. Well, first of all, what you actually perceive on the screen, if you're looking in a theater, and to a certain extent, it translates to TV. Uh, as an audience, we've grown up with certain perceptions of the image that we see. We know we're being told a story. You go into a theater, there's this big white flat wall, there's nothing there. And when they project the image on it, suddenly it comes to life and you are caught up in the story and the place and the characters. So film was always the way we saw that. And there are certain technical artifacts about film. Grain, the way the image is made up of little bits of grain that are captured on this film. So they move randomly on the screen. The way focus, depth of field, and so forth, all of this stuff is stuff that we have learned as an audience to understand how film is being told to us. When you translate to digital, some of those things change. The grain that was random on a piece of actual film is now set in a very mathematical pattern, and it doesn't move. And the focus of the lenses are slightly different, and so you have to somehow apply what we've learned for decades of audience. You have to learn to apply that to how do you tell the story to them with the modern technology. And one of the things I point out is that to film students especially, is that with film, the light that goes through the lens of the camera is captured on the film and it stays there. And all of the colors and everything that were out in front of the lens are captured there. There's very little you can do to change that image. So all of the decisions, the creative decisions you make about things like the lighting and contrast and color and camera position and the amount of focus and just an amazing amount of science. All of those things have to be thought of and solved before it hits the film, out in front of the lens. Now, with digital, you can run over to a monitor and look and see the image exactly. It isn't like a day or two later that it took with developing film. It's right now. And there's an awful lot of control that you have over the image. You can desaturate the colors, you can make the colors brighter. You can darken certain areas of the frame. There's all kinds of of image control that you can exert. And so I enjoy the digital world because of that creative control that it gives you. It's a you know, a lot of people sort of look back fondly at film, which I do because the images were very warm and storytelling. The trick is trying to accomplish that same look with the digital technology, and it's it's a challenge, but it's also some more tools that we have.
Yeah, I tell you, for me, and I know a lot of others, that there's nothing like seeing the film grain from someone shot on 35 on film. And I know that a lot of directors like Spielberg, Christopher Nolan, they love shooting on film because it has that warmth and realism to the texture of the film.
Yeah, it's often described as being more organic, but it's sometimes hard to maintain the technology. You have to take effort as they do, and I applaud them for doing their best to maintain that kind of image quality.
So now this next question intrigues me, having a filmmaker mindset, and the question might be a little bit technical. So I actually wrote it down here, so I wouldn't miss what I wanted to ask. With the move to full frame camera sensors like the Arri Alexa LF and the Red Monstro, do you have an opinion on whether you would use a lens that's 4 times longer than you would with Super 35, or would you use the same focal length and just move the camera closer to the subject to compensate? Or does it depend on the type of lenses you're using?
Yeah, that's a good and very technical question. I think that cinematography and storytelling with film has always been a very technical process. You look at the early films that were just in black and white hand cranked cameras, and you look how far we've come. It's always new technology and advances and presumably advances. But to me, it's always about the story and the storytelling. And so when it gets to full frame cameras and lenses, you say, well, what should this shot be? Is it shallow depth of field? Do I want the black background to be blurred so the audience isn't looking at that? Or do I want it very sharp all the way back so the audience is involved with the character? Those are the minuscule amount of decision making that you do when you're deciding. So it's always about understanding how the technology varies your image. Does it give you a lot of sharp focus? Does it decrease the amount of focus and you want to increase it? So you're always chasing the tail of technology in order to understand how to use it, how to modify it, for your storytelling.
Yeah, and I guess it would also depend exactly the scene you're shooting, what the director wants, what the cinematographer wants, how you want the audience to view that scene. All those come into a factor on set.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, to a certain extent, you can pre-visualize a scene. You read it and you think about what it should look like. But it isn't really until you get on the set with the real environment, the set, the location, whatever, the characters, where they're standing and how wide the frame should be. You start to make all of these decisions about how to use the the tools that we have in order to accomplish what it is the director wants, cinematographer, what the writer wants, what the actors want, you know, what the production designer wants. So it's always a collaborative effort, you know, the auteur theory that was, you know, pushed by the French quite a while ago, about the director was the auteur, the author, the creative force. That rarely happens, you know. That happens with, if you have a camera and you're making a film in your garage, or a documentary. But for the most part, the films we love, the storytelling, the characters, the laughter, the horror, the awe and wonderment, whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish on a film, is not the result of the auteur, but it is often, you know, motivated by a strong vision. But there's an awful lot of people who have to see the same vision and fulfill it.
And talking about on set, of course, it's like, as you said, it has to be a collaborative effort. You know, the old saying, there's no I in team. You know, it has to be a teamwork. And I mean, in the end, the director usually, well, the director does have the final say, but how much does a cinematographer have a say as far as camera position, lighting? I mean, does cinematographer have the final say on that, or the director does?
No, we always acknowledge that the final say is the director. The definition of his position, his creative abilities, is that the director has the final say. You can disagree completely with him, but if you can't talk him into, you know, a camera position, or if he can't explain the reason he wants a particular shot, you know, you hopefully you can understand the intention, but a lot of times you have to just say, oh, okay, you know, we'll do that. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of directors who understand the collaborative process, who welcome contributions, ideas, opinions from all the people around them, you know, and from the cinematographer, from the standpoint of visuals, down to the grips who have to put a camera somewhere and how to accomplish that. And the director should understand what's happening. To the prop person or the set dresser who comes and says, you know, I think the blue vase would be better than the red one. And the director says, why? Well, it won't draw your eye to the vase instead of to the camera. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Okay, good. Let's use the blue one. You know, so, you know, everybody can contribute, and you try to elicit those opinions, those contributions, so that people feel involved, as opposed to being told, no, you listen to me, I'm telling you that. In a case like that, many of them will say, oh, okay, fine, I'll just sit back and wait till he tells me.
Yeah, you never want to be a dictator on set.
No.
Yeah. No, our time is almost up here, but two more questions I want to ask is, can you tell us what projects you have working on now?
Well, obviously, at this particular moment in our history, everything is shut down. So we all sit anxiously waiting to get out and create again. I have friends who have been putting together a couple of films, and I have to say I've recently gotten interested in working on so-called smaller films, because the big ones, the superhero movies and the fantasies and all, you're just a sort of a cog in the wheel, a piece in the jigsaw puzzle, if you catch my alliterative drift. And so much of the work is done by the second unit and the third unit and the visual effects people and all. I enjoy working on smaller films where you're really sort of creatively involved in the whole thing, especially if it's a director who is interested in you becoming a part of the creative process. So most of the things I'm interested in now are individual little films where you can be really engaged in it. And I also enjoy giving back. So I've been teaching classes and so forth.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I tell you, film has changed so drastically over the past 20, 30 years. I have some director friends that say that these huge superhero movies are just, they feel like they're manufactured. They're not,
No, you look at the sources of them, and they are, very obscure video games and comic books, and it's not like I often advise film students to go back and look at old films from the 30s and 40s, because they didn't have all of the technology and the techniques, and they didn't have the audience didn't know from comic books and video games and things like that. They understood human stories. And a lot of those films from the 30s and 40s, even if you just look at average ones, not even the classics like Casablanca or whatever, you look at just the films that were meant to entertain people because they went to the movies 2 or 3 times a week. They didn't have television. So if you look at those films, you can see that the tradition of what we go see is really human stories. And while we can be intrigued by the spectacle of a superhero movie, we really know that that's not possible. Those characters really can't fly. I hope I'm not ruining something for you. And they can't make buildings blow up with a ray that comes out of their fingers or whatever. So you look at that as entertainment, but I think the thing that people also appreciate, or especially appreciate, are stories that could be possible. We empathize with the characters in a romantic comedy because we all want to be in love, or we all hated our girlfriend, or whatever the particular story is. We all want to be scared safely. We want to, we want to empathize with the girl because the guy jumps out of the closet with a knife. We don't want to be her, but we do want to participate in the emotional, content. So I think that, smaller films are something that really need to be maintained, and a lot of those things are jumping now to television, which are dramas that are all human dramas, so we can still appreciate them and experience them.
Yeah, exactly. There's one film that I always go back to when I think about older films in the past, and that is, I think it was in the 50s, Night of the Hunter.
Yes, that was, and it was of course remade, but that was the case of sort of the classic film of that period. The audience being involved with characters that you care about. They are established early on, and then there's this obsessed crazy guy, and now you as the audience are being tracked because your favorite people are in danger. So that's a classic example of the kinds of films that we love, and in reality we still love. They tell them a little differently. The style is a little different, but you can go back and look at those films and really appreciate the content and the storytelling and the characters.
Yeah, exactly. I always tell friends of mine or people wanting to get into filmmaking, like I said, that's the first, my go-to movie I tell them to watch. Watch that. Watch how it's made. Watch how the camera moves, the angles, how the actors are portraying these characters, and how that makes you feel as a viewer, and that's what you want to emulate.
Exactly. You know, there's so much to be learned from watching those old films because, um, you know, a lot of our storytelling now is corrupted by the spectacle that is possible. You know, a lot of times they do something um, and they do it even bigger, not because it has to be, but because they can. And you know, it somehow takes it out of the sense of reality that we could experience with the characters and our sides ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. Well, our time is up, but I just had one quick question. I know you do a lot of teaching, as you said, with film students. Do you have any advice for younger filmmakers wanting to get their foot in the door that maybe perhaps can't afford to go to USC or NYU? What advice do you have for them?
Well, film schools I think are very good. I went to UCLA, graduated, um, and um, it's a it's a chance to experience everything because they make you take editing, they make you write a
Mm,
script, they make you do all of these things. And even if you don't do any of them particularly well, you want to, you know, if you want to be an editor, you don't have to necessarily write a screenplay, but it's good to understand story, etc. Um, but there's an awful lot you can learn, as I say, by watching films, new films, old films. I advise them to watch any film, one you love, one that's, you know, an old one that may not be very good, and turn off the sound
mm,
and say, do I understand what is happening? What's happening to the character? What's the story? Just from the visuals. Or is the camera just being set up to record actors talking? How you know was Hitchcock create the tension and the suspense that was not done by other directors? You know, the shots, the camera movements that he invented to create that. So you can learn a lot as a student by watching films and being very critical. You know, don't get involved in the story every time. You know, because that's you're now the audience as opposed to the filmmaker. And there's opportunities now. I think when I was in film at the very beginning, there were drive-in theaters, and they needed product. They needed low-budget action movies and horror films and everything. Um, then there was this period where the drive-in theaters disappeared and the studios started making the drive-in theater movies, except that they were, you know, action adventure and bigger budgets and bigger stars. Um, and then, you know, now the drive-in theater has returned. It is now in your living room. It is that big screen television that you sit down and watch. And, you know, we all like it because we can pause the movie and go get a drink of water or to the bathroom or whatever, and then come back and resume it. So there's that whole new market. And there's the ability for young filmmakers to get a video camera. Yeah, temptation is to use your phone, but you know, the lens is fixed and it's very wide, and it automatically does everything for you. So don't be tempted to say, "Oh, I got my phone, I'll make a film." You need to get an actual video camera where you have to make choices, and you have to control the image, exposure, focus, and all of that. And you can make a film or short film or tests, whatever you would want to call them, And there are places now to exhibit your movie that wouldn't have been possible when I was starting. If we'd have to make an actual movie to have it in a drive-in theater. Now there's YouTube. There's
Mm-hmm.
all of these, um, you know, places, venues on the computer where you can post your film and have it seen by people and have them comment. I hated it. Oh, I loved that. Oh, it was really scary, whatever. And that can be your foot in the door a lot of times. You know, you hear all the time about somebody seeing a film online and saying, "Oh, interesting. Maybe I'll talk to them about this script I have or whatever." You know, so there's those kind of possibilities now. If you are serious, you will. It's like I say, you always pursue your dream single-mindedly. You know, don't listen to all these people who say no or impossible or whatever. You know, just find a way to keep after it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And like you know, when I first started, I started with a camera. I learned I didn't use the automatic settings. Like you said, use the manual settings. Learn exposure. Learn
Exactly.
the lens and so forth. And then I graduated to a camera, a video camera, and again turned off the automatic and did manual. And that's how, to me, like you said, that's the best way to learn how to move a camera, how to handle a camera, how to operate a camera. And as you said, you know, the technology has come so far. You can edit a movie on your laptop now,
Exactly.
and have it seen. And so I always tell people, just learn how to edit, learn how to use a camera, and go out there and start making a movie. And
Exactly.
that's the best way to learn.
And if you have the skill, the learning ability, or the talent, you know, it will become evident. You have something you can show people to prove it.
Exactly, exactly. Well, our time is up, but it was great talking to you again.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show and having this little conversation with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, and thanks, because it's helping preserve things that have disappeared from filmmaking in the 30s and 40s. We don't have any records except guys who have written books,
Yeah,
and that's always filtered through somebody else's perception, you know, and research. So I very much appreciate your efforts to kind of document people, even if it's one at a time.
yeah. Keep film alive.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, well, yeah. Say hi to your wife for me.
I will.
Yeah. I've been conversing with her on email. She's been
Yeah.
great, and
She's very good at setting these up and you know, going through the process. So it's always, you know, give her a call anytime.
I will. All right. You guys have a good evening, and yeah, maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Well, I would welcome that chance.
Great. We would love to have you back.